Absolutely. And that concludes the market update. I think it's a good time to transition into our main topic. We're talking DeFi and yield farming.
And we're picking today's episode to discuss this concept of decentralized finance, or DeFi, because the space has really exploded in short order. I mean, with an emergence really in 2019 spawning from the rise of decentralized exchanges and stablecoins, DeFi really only took off when lending protocols started becoming a reliable new source of alpha after the ICO market more or less dried up. And we're going to take a look at 3 different news articles that came out last week to explain DeFi. But if you want to get a little primer on this topic, I highly recommend watching the main topic for episode 42, collateralized lending with crypto assets, which, by the way, everyone, for those of you who don't know, all of these main topics are now available separately from the podcast itself, exclusively on YouTube. So you can check out our full library of over 50 episodes of main topics without needing to listen to all of the other segments of the show with each episode.
Yeah, Herwig, I think it's long overdue that we finally talk about DeFi as a subject. I think we should really break down how this space has evolved and really what this term of yield farming is, because it is pretty funny to say.
that it is, and we should start at the basics. DeFi, as with any term in blockchain, has a loose meaning, so I'll describe what I think it means first. I personally would boil it down to using blockchain and financial technology to deliver financial services, from loans to banking to insurance to investing, without the middleman, which is usually the bank or an agent or a manager. And one could even go a step further that these DeFi applications need to be inherently decentralized so that the trust is in the smart contracts, not those middlemen. But I think we could probably make a whole main topic out of that debate alone. So Kyle, you tell me, do you agree with my definition? Tell our listeners what you might change or add to that.
Yeah, you're totally right. I think that cutting out the middleman is a key here. We've covered that before, episode 44, about market making and how that can work without needing a centralized party. But DeFi is incredibly interesting because from what I've seen, the culture around DeFi has become just as poignant as the actual functionality itself. I define the DeFi movement as a transition to permissionless finance. Many of the DeFi community members believe that privacy is a key component as well. Personally, I'm definitely on board with the permissions piece. Anyone around the world should have access to an open financial system. In my eyes, a few main products do need to be available for anyone. Those would be a store of value, a transfer of value, and a line of credit. DeFi strives to achieve these things with tokenized products and smart contracts, which is why it's fascinating.
Yeah, so let's get right into the biggest use case that is really making DeFi so relevant over the last several months. And that, of course, is lending and borrowing. So Kyle, can you please break down for us this concept as simply as possible? Maybe just use Ethereum as the only currency in your example.
Yeah, totally. So listeners, bear with me. Certainly if you have any questions about what we cover, feel free to reach out to us. We love having these conversations. But when we're talking about decentralized lending, you've got protocols like Maker or Compound, which facilitate peer-to-peer loans. These organizations, known as DAOs, which stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organizations, are governed by the community and share all the profits made in the lending process to the community by leveraging smart contracts. Essentially, the lending works by allowing someone to collateralize their current assets for additional leverage from the market. If I have, say, 100 Ethereum in my account, I could lock up a portion of it, say 50, into the protocol and receive a loan from that protocol. The amount I receive back for my 50 depends on the lending history that I have with the protocol, in addition to the overall liquidity that the system has. To determine the amount that I will receive, I'm given a collateral factor that will allow me to easily calculate the amount that I would receive for every 1 ETH deposited into the system. Understandably, this would be from a 0 to 1 scale, and it's almost never at 1. You pretty much always have to over-collateralize your loan, which means you have to give 50 and maybe get back 35 just to give a little bit of cushion for the system. The amount I am lent is a significant portion lower, and so, for example, I might get 50% as a first-time user. And so in this example, that means that I would place 50 in my locked savings account and would receive 25 ETH in a liquid account that I could spend how I see fit. In this way, my loan is over-collateralized so that the system has that cushion in case the price of my locked Ethereum drops below my owned amount, so that the position could be liquidated and no one gets hurt. So essentially what that means is that I'm giving more so that in the case that anything happens and that price decreases, or the value rather decreases, then at some point it would reach a 1-to-1 ratio and my position would be closed. They would take the Ethereum that I had locked and then we'd be even. The books would be cleared, my loan would be forgiven because I've got my 25, it took its 25, and unfortunately that additional cushion that I had was lost in the price depreciation. In addition, I'm actually rewarded for locking up my 50 ETH because that 50 is then turned around and lent to other users who have also staked this asset. In this way, I not only receive the 25 ETH up front, but I'm actually paid a consistent fixed rate for lending my assets as well. I believe it's around 5 to 10%, so I think it's like 7 or 8 maybe. This return is paid in the native token of the protocol, in this case COMP or MKR tokens, which are not only a store of value, but also allow me to govern the protocol by voting using my tokens. In this way, I am both a debtor and a lender at the same time, which kind of makes that decentralized peer-to-peer system, and the only cost to me are the gas fees of the transaction to power those underlying smart contracts. No middleman to squeeze any percentage out of it.
Gotcha. That's a great breakdown. So going back to that whole decentralized component, the result is lending protocols have come out creating smart contract solutions to enable borrowing, lending, and staking, and have created their own tokens, usually described as these governance tokens, to incentivize users on both sides. That's what I'm hearing. And this term, by the way, staking, is really just referring to an incentive to hold the token, meaning that you will earn more as a reward from holding or locking your tokens as opposed to using them. This creates all kinds of effects, mostly liquidity benefits because it ensures a level of stability and sometimes even appetite for buying more when staking is related to not just how long you hold it, but how much you hold as well. So now today we've got all kinds of lending protocols that have been released, enabling cryptocurrency holders to either borrow against, lend out, or stake their different digital assets. And the results have been fascinating. For example, the BAT token, the BAT token, which is the native advertising token that is used in the Brave privacy browser, at one point actually became more traded in volume than Ether itself due to demand for it in the DeFi community. So specifically what happened was the compound lending protocol offered really great returns for the BAT token, and apparently more than 500 million worth of BAT was borrowed on the protocol in June alone. The protocol itself is worth over 1.5 billion according to the comp token value. And by the way, that's only less than a month old too. So, I mean, that is explosive growth.
It has absolutely exploded, hasn't it, Herwig? How do I put this simply to our users? DeFi has over $2 billion worth of assets being borrowed against now, and the market cap for the underlying token protocols has now reached over 7 billion. We're starting to get those ICO-like growth figures and behavior in the DeFi space, and it's got a lot of people excited. I mean, it's almost getting scary from a certain perspective too. There was another article that came out that explained how there's 3 times more DAI being lent out than there's actually available in total supply. And so I think we're going to take a crack at trying to explain how that works. With a synthetic product, we see double counting accounting principles. And so as you can imagine, with many of these startups, they don't really follow the generally accounting principles. And so when these assets are locked up and debt is issued, that synthetic debt is counted as net assets, despite the fact that it technically should be canceled out by the collateralized amount. This process has been replicated multiple times, leading to a significant swell in the outstanding currency.
Hold on, Kyle. Let me try to break that down. So in essence, someone borrows, let's call it 100 million DAI for, say, 100 million USDC coins in return as collateral. They then deposit the 100 million DAI they just received to get, say, a lending return on the BAT tokens that is a better yield than, of course, the USDC coins that they have. And that also means that the 100 million DAI can be lent out again by the protocol, right? Starting the process all over again as the rates then change behind different underlying tokens. The yield chasers, redeposit and move to the better rate, and the process starts all over again. Hence this new term described as yield farming.
So while on the surface it doesn't seem like a big deal that the DAI is borrowed 3 times out, it's just the one significant risk factor in programmatic liquidation. I'm not exactly sure how the value is calculated for these lending protocols because it's very complicated, but the main risk factor is that if I put in my 100 ETH of a different token, like the BAT token, and the price of BAT drops quickly, or in the case where the yield dries up and it's no longer exciting for someone to actually farm that coin, if you will, we could then see mass liquidation caused by the protocol as it pulls out of a lot of these contracts. In the event that this happens, we then see bank run style hysterias as the protocol can't really handle the outflow of capital in the same way that it can handle new deposits, right? Because you're staking this currency to get your returns. If you want to quick pull it out, that's not the point. They're paying you to keep it in. But if they can't keep you to keep your cash in, it can cause some serious problems. So I hope that to account for this, the protocols rebalance their portfolios so that they're not over leveraged in any one particular asset. Like, for example, if they have all the value in quotes stacked in BAT tokens, but that's staked for, let's say, a certain length of time, they could then in theory OTC a significant portion of those BAT tokens into something with more stable value, so that in the event that BAT has a crunch or a price decrease, they have their value outside of BAT. They can then rebuy and supply as someone wants to pull it back out. But they have to have that programmatically updating at all times to account for these potential risks. And quite frankly, I'm not exactly sure that's happening.
That means great smart contracts. That means great community consensus and organization. Definitely all interesting things that power these lending protocols that are decentralized in essence. So, the applications for DeFi, they are novel. But except, there's this very real problem that Kyle's describing, that it's entirely built on underlying artificial digital assets, which is why there's, that very reason for concern that Kyle's bringing up. But it's also, to me, an opportunity. It's exactly what Vertalo was referring to bring real-world assets into DeFi world, to create more stable and valuable assets that create real consistent yield and can be used as reliable collateral. We'll see how they end up succeeding. In the meantime, I expect many more projects around DeFi and security tokens to enter the market. I mean, we already did catch a glimpse of it with Centrifuge and tokenizing paper chain royalties and console fright invoices. And in fact, we ourselves are working on a stealth project over at Security Token Capital that will be relevant to this trend as well. So, for me, this is all truly, really exciting stuff. DeFi is creating a better illustration towards the use of blockchain and its benefits, in my opinion. And, at the end of the day, I will say that's not perfect unless you have real world assets and security tokens as part of that mix, I think.
Yeah, I also really like the direction it's all headed. But as you've alluded to, the theory behind a lot of this doesn't always depict reality. For example, many DeFi players push back against the idea of identifying investors and renounce anti-money laundering laws. But I feel that these rules are in for good reason, to prevent fraudulent schemes. Along the same vein, it's nearly impossible to predict market action because there are so many outside variables, and the fact that the market doesn't act rationally, which you just can't predict. And so many of those things aren't accounted for, which leaves room for programmatic layers to execute transactions swiftly and cheaply. But it's also very important to consistently monitor and make changes to our protocols as we see concerning metrics like the swelling of synthetic assets that we've covered in this episode. So it'll be very interesting to watch. We're going to keep our eye on this, and I'm sure the market will as well. But I think that's about it from us here at our main topic. As Herwig mentioned, we are uploading all of these main topics separately from the podcast as well on YouTube. So if you want to revisit a topic or just explore some of the topics while skipping maybe the news that isn't quite as relevant 6 months later, they're now all live on YouTube, all 50 episodes and 51, including this one. You can go check that out.
I have no doubt, Kyle, that we will be seeing DeFi come up in the main topics again in the future. But with that, that's our show. And I want to thank everybody for listening. I hope to catch you tuning in next week on Tuesdays.
Thanks for listening.